They say Buddhism is pessimistic, that it focuses too much on suffering, that it teaches us to expect pain instead of joy. Why? Because the Buddha said something simple and startling: life is suffering. But what if we've misunderstood that? What if the Buddha wasn't being negative, but honest? What if he wasn't offering a gloomy sentence on life, but pointing toward a hidden door? A door to freedom. Because he never said, stay in suffering. He said, understand it. This is not a condemnation of life. This is the beginning of clarity, the beginning of awakening. And if you've ever felt a quiet ache in your chest, a tension under your jaw, a question in your heart, like something's missing, even when everything seems fine, then you already know what the Buddha was talking about. Suffering is not a punishment. It's a message, a mirror, a teacher. So let's look again. Let's listen more deeply. Let's begin with the first noble truth. The Buddha's first noble truth: understanding suffering, dukkha. When I was in college, I remember sitting alone on a bench in the middle of campus one autumn afternoon. The leaves were turning, the air was crisp, and I had just gotten back my midterm results. On paper, things looked perfect. I was doing well academically, had friends, and was even casually dating someone I liked. But deep inside, I felt a tightness, a discomfort, an unease I couldn't explain. That day, I typed into Google, "Why do I feel sad when nothing's wrong?" That search led me years later to the Buddha's first noble truth: there is suffering. And for the first time, that statement didn't sound pessimistic to me. It felt honest, like someone finally told the truth out loud. Life is suffering. Really? At first glance, life is suffering sounds like the bleakest worldview imaginable. Many people, especially in the West, recoil from this idea. We live in cultures where positivity is a moral duty, where every commercial tells us we deserve happiness, and every Instagram quote urges us to choose joy. So when someone says life is suffering, it feels like a slap in the face. But let's pause and ask, what did the Buddha actually mean? The original Pali word for suffering is dukkha, and it's a far more nuanced term than its English translation suggests. Dukkha doesn't just mean physical pain or visible sorrow. It means dissatisfaction, unease, stress, incompleteness, and the fragile, unstable nature of all experiences. It refers to the fundamental tension we feel, even during good times, that something could go wrong. It's the whisper in the back of your mind saying, how long will this last? What if I lose this? Is this really enough? That is dukkha. Dukkha in everyday life. It's closer than you think. You don't have to experience a tragedy to taste dukkha. You can be lying on a beach on vacation, sipping a drink, and still feel it. You might call it anxiety, restlessness, or a fear that things might slip away. That's dukkha. Think about how often we're chasing things, jobs, partners, recognition, money, only to feel, once we get them, that they're not quite as fulfilling as we hoped, or worse, we're happy for a moment, and then the fear creeps in that we might lose it. Dukkha is embedded in this cycle, and this is exactly what the Buddha was pointing to over 2,500 years ago. Not that life is always miserable, but that life, as we experience it with craving and clinging, is ultimately unsatisfactory. What the Buddha actually said: 6 kinds of dukkha. The Buddha's first noble truth isn't just a vague generalization. He broke it down clearly in his teachings. In the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha explained 6 specific kinds of suffering. 1. Birth is suffering. Not only the pain of being born, but the beginning of a life bound to change, illness, and death. 2. Aging is suffering. As we grow older, our bodies decline, our memories fade, and we lose what we once took for granted. 3. Illness is suffering. Physical pain, mental disorder, and the fear that arises when our health deteriorates. 4. Death is suffering. The final, unavoidable end that strips us of everything we've known. 5. Union, what is unpleasant, is suffering. Being stuck in situations, relationships, or places that cause distress. 6. Separation from what is pleasant is suffering. Losing what we love, be it a person, a pet, a phase of life, or even our youth. And finally, not getting what one wants is suffering. This last one hit me hard. We live in a culture that tells us we can have everything we want if we work hard enough. But the truth is, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we want love, and it doesn't come. Sometimes we want peace, and all we find is chaos, and no amount of affirmation can erase that fact. Is this truth a judgment or an invitation? Here's the critical point. The Buddha didn't say life is suffering because we are broken. He didn't say we deserve to suffer or that there's something wrong with us. In fact, quite the opposite. He said, this is how things are. Not as a moral condemnation, but as a clear-eyed observation of reality. If you drop a glass, it shatters. That's not bad, it's just cause and effect. Similarly, if we live with attachment, expectation, and illusion, suffering naturally follows. There's a kind of spiritual maturity in admitting this. Just like a good doctor doesn't sugarcoat your diagnosis, the Buddha didn't sugarcoat the truth, but he also didn't leave us in despair. The First Noble Truth is just the beginning of a path that ultimately leads to freedom. But to begin, we must stop pretending everything is fine. My story with Dukkha, an honest realization. Let me take you back to a personal moment. A few years ago, I got a job I had been dreaming about for years. It had a good salary, flexibility, creative freedom, the works. Everyone congratulated me. My parents were proud. I should have been thrilled. But a few months in, I started feeling something strange, a subtle pressure in my chest, a restlessness at night, a constant inner voice asking, is this it? I kept trying to fix it, exercise more, meditate, see friends, change my diet. But the feeling remained. Eventually, I came across this line from the Buddha: not getting what one wants is suffering, but so is getting what one wants and realizing it doesn't satisfy. It struck me like lightning. That was me. I had everything I wanted, but the hunger hadn't gone away. Why? Because I was still looking outside for fulfillment, trying to fix an internal ache with external rewards. That moment didn't magically solve everything, but it did change how I approached life. Instead of seeing suffering as a failure, I began to see it as a signal, something to learn from, not run from. So why accept this truth? Doesn't it just make us sad? Here's the paradox. Accepting suffering doesn't make you more depressed. It makes you less enslaved by it. Why? Because once you stop pretending life should be easy or painless or fair, once you stop clinging to the fantasy that you're supposed to be happy all the time, you start to relax into the truth. And from that space, real peace becomes possible. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every day, thinking it's part of your body. You adjust your life around it, struggle with the weight, and try to pretend it's fine. Then one day someone says, you know that's not you, right? You can take it off. At first it's jarring, but then liberating. That's what the First Noble Truth does. It says you don't have to pretend anymore. The cultural clash, positivity versus honesty. Many people, especially in the West, mistake the Buddha's teaching for negativity, but there's a world of difference between being negative and being honest. Toxic positivity says, just be happy. Buddhism says, see clearly. Our culture is obsessed with feeling good, but feeling good is fleeting. Buddhism asks, what lies beyond pleasure, beyond pain, beyond chasing and avoiding? That's where real peace begins, not in avoiding suffering, but in understanding its nature. The gift in the darkness. The First Noble Truth is not a reason to despair. It's a call to wake up. Suffering, when we stop fearing it, becomes a doorway. Each time we experience disappointment, we're invited to look deeper. What was I expecting? Why did I believe this would make me whole? What am I really looking for? This isn't a rejection of joy, it's an embrace of life in its fullness. Because when you accept Dukkha, you begin to experience joy that's not dependent on conditions, a joy rooted in presence, simplicity, and truth. A gentle revolution. The First Noble Truth isn't saying life is only suffering. It's saying that if we live blindly, clinging to impermanent things, and demanding life meet our expectations, we will suffer. But if we learn to see clearly, if we accept life on life's terms, if we stop demanding that things be other than they are, then we open the door to freedom. Not freedom from pain, but freedom in the midst of it. That is the beauty of the Buddha's first truth. Not a condemnation, but an invitation. Not a verdict, but a vision. What is suffering? Dukkha, a deep dive into the nature of unsatisfactoriness. When we hear the word suffering, we often think of acute pain, tragedy, or obvious emotional distress. We imagine someone grieving a loss, enduring a physical illness, or facing a traumatic event. But the Buddha's concept of suffering, encapsulated in the word dukkha, goes far beyond those definitions. It points to a much more pervasive, subtle, and profound truth about our human experience. The term dukkha in Pali is notoriously difficult to translate into a single English word. It's often rendered as suffering, but that translation doesn't do justice to its depth. Dukkha encompasses a wide range of experiences, from blatant misery to a soft, almost invisible sense of dissatisfaction. It includes the gnawing anxiety beneath joy, the fear that comes with success, the pressure behind achievement, and the constant hum of not quite rightness that underpins even our happiest moments. I remember a time when I experienced this in a way I didn't understand until years later. It was during my college graduation. I was standing in a rented gown under a blazing sun, smiling for pictures with family and friends. On the surface, everything was perfect. I had graduated with honors, I had a job offer, I was surrounded by people who loved me. But I remember feeling hollow, not miserable, not sad, just a kind of emptiness. A quiet question in the back of my mind, is this it? Shouldn't I feel more? At the time, I felt guilty for that feeling. It wasn't until I came across the teachings on dukkha that I finally understood what had been happening. This is the kind of suffering that dukkha includes: subtle, psychological, and existential. It's not always loud or dramatic. Often, it's a whisper, a background static, a soft discomfort that colors everything. The fragility of joy. One of the most powerful insights from Buddhism is that even joy can carry within it the seeds of suffering. How? Because joy in conditioned life is impermanent. It's fleeting. And somewhere inside us, we know this. When we fall in love, part of us fears heartbreak. When we achieve something great, part of us worries about the pressure to maintain it, or the fear that it might be taken away. This is dukkha. Not because there is something wrong with love or success, but because we cling to them, hoping they will last forever. Let me give you a more personal example. A few years ago, I finally took the leap and traveled solo to Japan, a dream I had nurtured for years. The first few days were everything I had imagined: quiet temples, delicious food, beautiful landscapes. But then something strange happened. I began feeling anxious. I worried that the trip would end too soon. I checked the calendar obsessively, counting how many days I had left. The more I tried to hold on to the joy, the more it slipped away. That's when I realized, even in paradise, dukkha follows us. Not because joy is a problem, but because our attachment to it is. We want to possess happiness, to freeze it in time, but it doesn't work that way. The illusion of control. Much of our suffering comes from the illusion that we can control life, that if we just do things right, we can secure lasting happiness and avoid pain. But reality doesn't operate on our terms. Things change, people leave, health declines, plans fall apart. Even our own minds fluctuate wildly from day to day. The Buddha taught that everything in conditioned existence is impermanent, anicca, unsatisfactory, dukkha, and not entirely in our control, anatta. These aren't gloomy doctrines, they are observations of how things are. The idea isn't to depress us, but to help us live with greater clarity and freedom. Here's another story from my life that illustrates this. I once poured months into organizing a professional conference. I did everything I could, scheduled the speakers, booked the venue, arranged travel, marketed the event. But on the day of the conference, a snowstorm hit. Flights were canceled. The keynote speaker couldn't come. Attendance dropped by half. I was devastated. I had tried so hard to manage every detail, but I couldn't control the weather. It was a lesson in humility and in dukkha. Dukkha is not personal. Perhaps one of the most liberating aspects of the Buddhist understanding of suffering is that it's not personal. We often internalize suffering as a sign that something is wrong with us, that we've failed in some way. But dukkha is not your fault. It's the nature of conditioned life. Imagine trying to build a sandcastle while the tide is rising. You might be the best architect in the world, but eventually the waves will come. That's not your failure. It's just the reality of sand and sea. In the same way, our human experience, rooted in birth, aging, loss, desire, is bound to be unstable. Recognizing this can lead not to despair, but to a strange and beautiful kind of peace. Understanding, not escaping. So, what are we supposed to do with this knowledge? If life is marked by dukkha, do we just give up and withdraw? Absolutely not. The Buddha didn't teach dukkha to make us hopeless. He taught it to awaken us, to help us stop chasing fantasies and start living with wisdom. Understanding dukkha helps us shift our relationship with suffering. Instead of reacting with panic or resistance, we learn to observe it. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? We begin asking, what is this showing me? This is where mindfulness comes in. When we practice present moment awareness, we start to notice the constant push and pull of craving and aversion. We begin to catch the subtle ways we resist reality, and in doing so, create suffering for ourselves. I remember once being stuck in traffic, late for a meeting. My usual reaction would have been frustration, maybe even road rage. But that day I remembered to breathe, to feel the tension in my hands, to notice the thoughts racing through my head. In that space of awareness, something shifted. The suffering didn't vanish, but it became lighter, almost spacious. That's the power of understanding dukkha, not a pessimistic truth, but a liberating one. It's crucial to understand that the Buddha's teaching on suffering is not a condemnation of life. It's a compassionate acknowledgement of its complexity. Life contains beauty, joy, love, and meaning, but all within a framework that is fragile, changing, and not fully under our control. When we embrace dukkha as part of the deal, not as a mistake to be fixed, but as a reality to be lived with skillfully, we stop wasting energy resisting what is. We stop expecting perfection from ourselves, from others, from the world. And in that moment, something remarkable happens. We find peace, not because suffering is gone, but because we are no longer at war with it. Understanding dukkha is not the end of the path, it's the beginning. It's the doorway to deeper inquiry, to more honest living, and ultimately to liberation. So the next time you feel that subtle ache, the feeling that something's missing, even when things are good, pause, listen. You're not broken, you're not failing. You're just touching the edge of dukkha. And maybe, just maybe, that's where awakening begins. The common misconception, life should be happy, a Buddhist response to modern positivity culture. In today's world, especially in Western culture, there's a deeply ingrained belief that life is supposed to be happy. That if we just think positively, work hard, and maintain the right attitude, things will go well. We are constantly bombarded with messages like, good vibes only, choose happiness, and stay positive. They're printed on coffee mugs, posted on social media, and even embedded in corporate culture. While these phrases may seem uplifting on the surface, they can actually be harmful because they promote a misunderstanding of human life, and they often make people feel guilty for feeling anything less than joyful. The Buddha offered a radically different perspective. He wasn't trying to sell us optimism. He wasn't a motivational speaker telling us to look on the bright side. He was a truth teller. And the truth he shared is this: life is marked by suffering, or more accurately, dukkha. Dukkha is not simply pain or obvious sadness. It includes the subtle unease that arises even in good times, the dissatisfaction that creeps into moments we thought would make us happy, and the underlying tension of living in a world that is constantly changing. The Buddha didn't deny that happiness exists, but he taught that if we build our lives around the expectation of permanent happiness, we are bound to suffer even more. The tyranny of positivity. Growing up in the US, I often heard people say things like, everything happens for a reason, or it'll all work out in the end. These phrases were meant to be comforting, but over time they began to feel like pressure. When I was struggling with anxiety in my 20s, I didn't want to hear that I just needed to be more positive. I wanted someone to say, it's okay to feel this way. You're not broken. But that wasn't the message I got. Instead, I felt like I had failed at life because I couldn't maintain a smile all the time. This is the shadow side of positivity culture. It turns natural human emotions like sadness, fear, and doubt into signs of personal weakness. The Buddha's teachings offered me something entirely different. Instead of telling me to escape or fix my suffering, he invited me to look directly at it, to investigate it, to understand it. And in doing so, I began to feel more whole, not less. Happiness as a product. Another problem with the idea that life should be happy is that it turns happiness into a product, something we have to chase, buy, or earn. Look at advertising. It constantly tells us that if we just have this new car, this new skincare product, this perfect relationship, we'll finally be happy. But it never lasts. We get the thing, we feel a temporary high, and then the craving begins again. Buddhism cuts through this illusion by pointing out the impermanence of all conditioned things. That new car will age, that beautiful face will wrinkle, that exciting relationship will change. This isn't meant to depress us. It's meant to free us from chasing what can never truly satisfy. I remember buying a new phone once after months of waiting for its release. I unboxed it with excitement, took pictures, showed it off to friends. Within a week, it was just a phone. The thrill was gone. This pattern repeats over and over in our lives, and yet we rarely stop to ask, why do I keep expecting this time to be different? The burden of should. When we say life should be happy, we're setting ourselves up for failure. That word should carries an expectation that becomes a burden. If I'm not happy, then something is wrong with me or with my life. But what if life isn't meant to be one long, unbroken line of joy? What if emotional pain is not a detour but part of the path? This is what the Buddha understood. He didn't teach us to deny joy or avoid pleasure, but he did warn us not to cling to them. Because clinging is the root of suffering. When we demand that life conform to our desires, that it always feel good, always make sense, we create tension. And that tension is dukkha. It's like trying to hold on to water with our bare hands. The tighter we squeeze, the more it slips away. Life is fluid. Change is constant. The sooner we make peace with that, the more space we create for a deeper kind of contentment, one that isn't dependent on everything going our way, a more compassionate approach. So what's the alternative? If we stop chasing happiness, what do we do instead? We turn inward. We cultivate awareness. We learn to sit with our experience, whatever it may be. This is the foundation of Buddhist practice, mindfulness and compassion. Mindfulness teaches us to be present with what is, not what should be, not what could be, but what actually is happening right now. And compassion teaches us to hold that experience with kindness, not trying to fix it, not judging it, just being with it. I remember one night, after a particularly rough day at work, I came home and felt completely drained. My old habit would have been to distract myself, watch Netflix, scroll on my phone, do anything but feel. But that night, I decided to just sit. I lit a candle, closed my eyes, and breathed. I felt the tension in my shoulders, the heaviness in my chest, and I said to myself quietly, this too is part of life. That simple act of acknowledgement, without resistance, without pretending, was incredibly healing. Not because the pain went away, but because I stopped fighting it. That's the shift the Buddha invites us to make. Seeing clearly, living freely. The real gift of the Buddha's teaching is that it allows us to live with our eyes open. We no longer have to pretend that everything is fine. We no longer have to perform happiness. We can be real. And in that honesty, there's incredible freedom. Yes, life includes joy, but it also includes sorrow. Yes, there are moments of peace, but there are also storms. The goal isn't to eliminate suffering, but to see it clearly, to understand its causes, and to relate to it with wisdom. When we stop demanding that life be happy all the time, we become more resilient. We can face difficulty without collapsing. We can hold our emotions with greater grace, and we can extend that same understanding to others, knowing that they too are navigating the ups and downs of being human. The Buddha didn't promise us a life without suffering, but he did offer a path through it, a path of insight, compassion, and liberation. And that path begins not by denying our pain, but by daring to look at it with open eyes and an open heart. So the next time you see a sign that says, just be happy, smile if you like, but also remember, you don't have to be happy all the time. You just have to be present. That's where real peace lives. Social media and the illusion of happiness, a modern lens on dukkha. Social media has transformed the way we see ourselves and others. It's not just a tool, it's an environment, a digital ecosystem where billions of people curate their lives, share highlight reels, and consume content that is often designed to evoke envy, admiration, or aspiration. From a Buddhist perspective, this environment amplifies one of the core truths of human experience, dukkha. Dukkha, the Pali word often translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness, is not limited to visible pain. It's the subtle discontent that follows us even in moments that appear perfect on the surface. Social media is a perfect mirror for this kind of suffering, not because the platforms are inherently evil, but because they reflect and intensify our craving, our comparison, and our confusion about what happiness really means. The filtered reality. Let's be honest, most people don't post their real lives online. We don't share pictures of ourselves crying after a breakup, sitting in traffic, or waking up anxious at 3 a.m. We post the beach vacations, the engagement photos, the job promotions. We use filters to brighten our smiles, enhance the colors of our meals, and hide the blemishes on our skin. But here's the trap. We compare our raw, unedited lives with someone else's carefully highlight reel. And even though we know it's curated, we still feel inadequate. That's Dukkha. It's not just the platform, it's the illusion that everyone else is living a better, more beautiful, more successful life. I remember scrolling through Instagram during a particularly lonely period in my life. Everyone seemed to be in a relationship, traveling, or achieving something amazing. Meanwhile, I was eating dinner alone, reheating leftovers, and battling self-doubt about my career. Rationally, I knew those photos didn't tell the whole story. But emotionally, I felt left out, like life was happening for everyone else and I had missed the memo. That illusion was powerful. It made me forget that I was seeing pixels, not people, that I was witnessing moments, not the full spectrum of their lives. Comparison as a source of suffering. One of the strongest drivers of suffering on social media is comparison. The Buddha spoke clearly about this. He taught that craving, tanha, arises not just from desire for objects, but from our deep need to be someone special, someone admired, someone valued. Social media preys on this tendency. It quantifies approval, likes, followers, views, shares. It turns validation into a scoreboard. And the result, a constant inner narrative of judgment. Why does she have more followers than me? Why does his life look so put together? What am I doing wrong? These thoughts aren't rare, they're baked into the experience of scrolling. We feel them subtly, even if we don't say them out loud. This constant comparison chips away at our well-being. It breeds a sense of insufficiency. And that's pure dukkha. The myth of perpetual happiness. The underlying message of most online content is this: you should be happy, and if you're not, you're doing something wrong. Buy this product, follow this diet, learn these 5 life hacks, mimic this influence, then you'll feel better. But the truth is, no one is happy all the time. No one escapes loss, fear, illness, disappointment. The polished smiles and sunset selfies might suggest otherwise, but behind every glowing feed is a human being navigating the same emotional terrain as the rest of us. Once, I met a popular wellness influencer at a conference. Her feed was filled with glowing skin, yoga poses at sunrise, and poetic captions about gratitude. In person, she was kind, but also exhausted. She confessed how pressured she felt to always be inspiring, even when she was depressed or dealing with panic attacks. It's like I'm not allowed to have a bad day anymore, she said. That conversation never left me. It reminded me that even those we idolize online are often struggling silently. The problem isn't that people post happy moments, it's that we assume those moments represent the whole. Dukkha behind the filter. Social media doesn't cause dukkha, it reveals it. It offers a magnifying glass through which we can see our habitual patterns of attachment, comparison, and ego. Every time we feel envy, it points to a craving. Every time we feel insecure, it points to a story we're telling ourselves about our worth. From a Buddhist standpoint, this isn't a moral failing. It's simply the nature of an untrained mind. The mind wants to grasp, to define, to feel important. Social media gives it infinite opportunity to do so, but at a cost. Mindfulness teaches us to pause, to recognize when we're being swept into fantasy or self-judgment, to notice when the scrolling becomes a substitute for real connection, or a mask for boredom, fear, or loneliness, the practice of digital mindfulness. So, how can we relate more skillfully to social media? First, we must remember that everything we see online is impermanent. That perfect vacation, it ended. That perfect body, it ages. That viral post, forgotten in a week. Second, we can start practicing right intention online. This means being mindful of what we consume and what we share. Are we posting to be seen, to compete, to escape? Or are we sharing something meaningful, kind, or honest? Third, we must make room for authenticity. Some of the most powerful posts I've seen were not about success, but vulnerability. People talking openly about grief, burnout, failure. These moments remind us that we are not alone. Personally, I began a practice of mindful scrolling. Before opening an app, I pause and ask, why am I opening this right now? If the answer is boredom or anxiety, I try to sit with that feeling instead. Sometimes I still scroll, but I do it with more awareness. Social media as a mirror. In Buddhism, we're taught that the external world is a mirror for the internal world. Social media is no exception. It reflects our longings, our fears, our ego needs, but it can also reflect our compassion, our wisdom, and our capacity to grow. The goal isn't to demonize technology or shame ourselves for being online. The goal is to wake up, to use every experience, even scrolling Instagram, as an opportunity for insight. That is the path of the Dharma. Not to escape the modern world, but to engage with it more consciously. So the next time you find yourself lost in someone else's highlight reel, take a breath. Notice the thoughts, feel the feelings, and remind yourself, behind every filter is a person. Behind every post is a life filled with both joy and sorrow, just like yours. And in that shared humanity, in that recognition of dukkha, you may just find the beginning of peace. The story of Kisagotami and the mustard seed, a Buddhist teaching on shared suffering. The story of Kisagotami is one of the most powerful and emotionally resonant teachings in all of Buddhist literature. It speaks not only to the inevitability of loss, but also to the universal nature of suffering and the path toward awakening through understanding this truth. Unlike philosophical theories or abstract doctrines, this story is rooted in human experience. It's about a mother, a child, grief, desperation, and ultimately, realization. Kisagotami was a young woman who had just given birth to her first child. For a time, her life was full of joy. Her child was the center of her world, but that world was shattered when the child fell ill and died. Kisagotami's grief was total. She couldn't accept what had happened. In denial, she cradled the lifeless body in her arms and wandered through her village, begging neighbors, doctors, anyone to help her bring the child back to life. People didn't know what to do. Some tried to console her, others pitied her, but no one could help her. Eventually, someone told her, "Go see the Buddha. Maybe he can help." Desperate, Kisagotami found the Buddha and begged him to revive her child. The Buddha looked at her with deep compassion and said, "Yes, I can help you, but first bring me a mustard seed from a home where no one has ever died." Relieved, Kisagotami set out, knocking on door after door, hopeful that somewhere, some family had been spared the touch of death. But every household she visited gave her the same answer. "Yes, we have mustard seeds, but we have also lost someone. A parent, a child, a sibling, a friend." Over time, as she went from home to home, the weight of the Buddha's request began to settle in. It was not a trick, not a puzzle to solve, it was a lesson. She saw that death had visited every home, every family. Her pain, while unique in form, was not unique in nature. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone carried grief. This realization was the beginning of her awakening, the shared nature of suffering. One of the most painful aspects of loss is the feeling of isolation. We believe our suffering is unique, that no one could possibly understand the depth of what we've lost. Kisagotami felt this too, but what she discovered was the exact opposite. Her suffering connected her to everyone else. In Western culture, there's often an emphasis on individualism. We're taught to stand on our own, to solve our problems by ourselves. But suffering can't always be solved. Some things like death can only be understood, held, and eventually accepted. That shift from trying to fix suffering to trying to understand it is where transformation begins. I remember experiencing something similar when my father passed away. I was in my early 30s, and although his death wasn't unexpected, it still shook me. I spent months trying to manage my grief with logic, trying to distract myself with work, trying to intellectualize the experience. But it didn't work. One day, I attended a support group for people who had lost a parent. It wasn't therapy. No one offered advice. People just shared their stories, and I cried more in that 1 hour than I had in the previous 3 months. Not because the stories were tragic, but because they were familiar. I saw myself in them. For the first time, I realized that my grief wasn't a personal failure or some psychological problem. It was just love with nowhere to go. And I wasn't alone in it. That was my Kisagotami moment, the Buddha's teaching method. What's remarkable about the Kisagotami story is the method the Buddha used. He didn't give a sermon. He didn't quote scripture. He gave her a task, not to mock her, but to guide her toward insight through her own experience. This is the essence of skillful means, upaya. The Buddha knew that no amount of reasoning would pierce the armor of her grief. She had to see for herself, and she did. There's something deeply respectful in this approach. Rather than imposing truth from the outside, the Buddha trusted Kisagotami's ability to discover it within herself. This kind of experiential learning is far more powerful than any intellectual explanation. It makes me think about how we often try to comfort others in grief. We say things like, "He's in a better place," or "Everything happens for a reason," but these phrases rarely bring comfort. Often, what people need isn't a reason or a fix. They need space. They need to feel seen. The Buddha gave Kisagotami that space while gently guiding her toward a wider view of life, letting go of the idea that we shouldn't suffer. Part of what made Kisagotami's suffering unbearable was the belief that it shouldn't be happening. She thought something had gone terribly wrong. Her child had died, and that to her felt like a break in the natural order. But what she learned is that death is the natural order, that suffering isn't a punishment or a failure. It's part of the human condition. We are born, we grow old, we get sick, we die. Everyone we love will one day be taken from us, or we from them. This is not meant to be cruel. It's simply the way life works. When we stop believing that suffering is a mistake, we can begin to relate to it differently. Instead of resisting it with all our might, we begin to hold it gently. We allow it to be part of the story, not the whole story, but an essential part. Grief as a doorway to compassion. One of the most beautiful things about Kisagotami's transformation is what it represents, a shift from personal pain to compassionate connection. After her awakening, she didn't just move on from her grief. She joined the monastic community. She dedicated her life to the path, wisdom, and compassion. In my own experience, grief has made me softer, not weaker, but more attuned to the suffering of others. I listen differently now. I don't rush to fix things. I understand that sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer someone in pain is our presence. The Buddha taught that suffering can be our greatest teacher, if we're willing to let it teach us. Kisagotami's story is a testament to that truth. Her pain didn't disappear, but it was transformed, and in that transformation, she found freedom. The timeless message. The reason this story continues to resonate across cultures and centuries is because it speaks to a universal reality. We all suffer, and we all want to believe we are alone in it, but we're not. Everyone has lost something. Everyone carries grief. Kisagotami didn't find a house free from death, but in looking, she found something even more precious, understanding. And that, according to the Buddha, is the beginning of liberation. In a world obsessed with avoiding pain, her story reminds us that path to awakening often begins in the heart of our deepest sorrow. The practice, facing dukkha with wisdom. The first noble true, suffering, is not a fatalistic declaration. It's not meant to trap us in despair. Instead, it's an invitation, an opening, a first step toward freedom. In Buddhism, the acknowledgement of dukkha is not the end of the path. It's the beginning of awakening. And how we meet dukkha, how we relate to our pain, determines whether it becomes our prison or our teacher. In modern society, the dominant response to discomfort is avoidance. We distract ourselves, numb out, blame others, or try to fix the feeling with solutions that often bring more suffering in the long run. But the Buddhist path asks something radically different of us: to turn toward our suffering, not away from it, to be still, to observe, to understand. The courage to stay. When I first began meditating, I imagined that it would quickly bring peace, maybe even bliss. I thought mindfulness helped me calm down, feel less anxious, and be more productive. And sometimes it did. But more often, sitting in silence felt like being stuck in a noisy room inside my own mind. My body would ache. My thoughts would spiral. Memories I hadn't thought about in years would suddenly surface. There was one sitting in particular I'll never forget. I had just gone through a painful breakup, and I decided to do a weekend retreat to help myself move on. But sitting in silence for hours only made the pain louder. I wanted to run, to cry, to scroll through my phone, to call someone and talk it out. But the practice was to stay, just stay. That weekend was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but by the end of it, something shifted. The grief didn't go away, but it changed. It lost its sharp edge. It became something I could sit with, something I could learn from. And I realized resisting pain intensifies it. Facing it begins to heal it. This is the essence of Buddhist practice, not to eliminate dukkha, but to transform our relationship to it. Mindfulness, seeing clearly. Mindfulness, sati, is the foundation of how we practice with dukkha. It is the simple yet profound act of paying attention to what is happening in the present moment without judgment. When discomfort arises, the untrained mind wants to escape. Mindfulness trains us to stay, to breathe, to name what's happening: sadness, tightness in the chest, worrying thought. We bring awareness to the experience without adding stories, blame, or panic. For example, if I'm sitting in traffic and feeling frustrated, I can take a breath and say, frustration is here. That single act of naming creates space. It interrupts the automatic spiral of thoughts like, this shouldn't be happening, or why does this always happen to me? Instead of becoming the frustration, I observe it. And in that observation, something powerful happens. I remember that I am not the emotion. I am the awareness of the emotion. That insight is the seed of freedom. Compassion, softening the heart. Mindfulness helps us see. Compassion helps us hold what we see. In Buddhist psychology, compassion, karuna, is the response to suffering that says, yes, this hurts and I care. It is not pity. It is not fixing. It is the courageous act of staying present with pain, our own or another's, with kindness. Many of us are much harder on ourselves than we are on others. We judge ourselves for being sad, angry, tired, or afraid. But Buddhist practice teaches us to meet those states with the same tenderness we would offer a crying child. There was a period in my life when I was overwhelmed by self-criticism. Every time I failed or fell short, I would mentally berate myself. A teacher once gave me a practice. Whenever that voice arose, I was to put my hand on my heart and silently say, this is a moment of suffering. May I be kind to myself. At first it felt awkward, even silly, but over time it became a lifeline. I started to see that my suffering wasn't a flaw. It was part of being human, and I could meet it with care. That shift from judgment to compassion is where deep healing begins. Not fixing, just being. One of the most difficult ideas for people new to Buddhist practice is the idea that we're not trying to fix our suffering. In a culture obsessed with self-improvement and productivity, the notion of just being with discomfort can feel like giving up. But it's actually the opposite. It's the most courageous, transformative thing we can do. When we stop resisting what is, we begin to see clearly. And when we see clearly, wisdom arises. Imagine holding a snow globe. When you shake it, everything is swirling. That's how the mind often is, chaotic, reactive. But when you set the snow globe down and let it rest, the flakes settle. The scene becomes clear. Meditation is like setting down the snow globe. It allows us to see what's actually there. And often, what's there is not as scary as we imagined. Suffering, as teacher in Buddhism, suffering isn't just something to endure. It's something to learn from. Dukkha becomes our teacher when we stop running from it. When I reflect on the most meaningful growth in my life, it didn't come during the easy times. It came from heartbreak, illness, failure, uncertainty. It came from sitting in dark places and learning to breathe there. Those experiences stripped away illusions and forced me to confront what really matters. The Buddha didn't promise a life without pain. He promised that by understanding the nature of suffering, we could be free from its grip. This is not the freedom of getting everything we want. It's the freedom of not being enslaved by wanting. It's the freedom of knowing that we can meet life as it is, with steadiness, clarity, and love. Daily practice, bringing it into life. Facing dukkha with wisdom is not something that happens only on a meditation cushion. It's a daily practice. It happens in traffic, in arguments, in moments of disappointment, in grief, in loneliness. Some days, the practice is just pausing before reacting. Other days, it's feeling your feelings without trying to change them. And some days, it's simply remembering to breathe. A few years ago, I started a habit of checking in with myself throughout the day, not to judge, but to notice. I'd ask, what's here right now? Often the answer was stress or fatigue. Sometimes it was joy. But whatever it was, naming it helped me face it, and facing it helped me move through it. Over time, I've come to trust that no feeling lasts forever. That's one of the gifts of mindfulness. It teaches us impermanence not as a concept, but as a lived truth, the wisdom of presence. In the end, facing dukkha with wisdom isn't about eliminating suffering. It's about learning to stay present with it, to meet it with compassion, and to let it teach us. There's a Zen saying, the obstacle is the path. Dukkha is not a detour. It's not a mistake. It's the very material of awakening. And when we meet it with awareness and love, it becomes not just something we endure, but something that opens us. We stop running, we stop resisting, we simply sit. And in that quiet space, we begin to understand what the Buddha meant. Suffering is not the end of the road. It's the beginning of freedom. Reflection. Have you looked closely? We live in a world that tells us to move fast, hustle, optimize, achieve. But in all that rushing, have we ever truly paused, really sat down with our own pain? Not to fix it, not to explain it away, but just to look at it, to hold it, to witness it. This question isn't abstract, it's deeply practical, because the way we relate to our discomfort, our sadness, our anxiety, our confusion, shapes our entire experience of life. And most of the time, without realizing it, we're at war with ourselves. Have you ever noticed how quickly we reach for distraction the moment a difficult feeling arises? A notification, a snack, a scroll, a glass of wine. It's not that these things are inherently bad, but often they're ways we avoid being with what's actually happening inside us. Years ago, I went through a season of burnout. From the outside, everything looked fine. I was showing up to work, hitting deadlines, even socializing. But inside, I felt disconnected, tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I started waking up with this vague dread I couldn't name. Instead of pausing to understand it, I pushed harder. More coffee, more productivity hacks, more pretending. Until one weekend, I hit a wall. I stayed in bed for most of the day, completely drained. That evening, I turned off my phone, lit a candle, and just sat in silence. I didn't meditate in any formal sense. I didn't try to practice. I just let myself feel whatever was there. Grief, guilt, fear, a strange sense of loss I hadn't acknowledged. It was overwhelming, but also strangely grounding, like meeting a part of myself I had ignored for too long. That night was the beginning of a shift, not because anything magically changed, but because I had finally looked closely, without judgment, without trying to escape, sitting with what hurts. What if we did that more often? What if we sat with our anxiety, not to silence it, but to listen? What if our sadness wasn't a problem to be solved, but a message to be heard? In Buddhism, mindfulness isn't just about focusing on the breath or clearing the mind. It's about being present with whatever arises, and that includes pain. When fear surfaces, we don't push it down, we notice it. When confusion clouds the mind, we stay with it, not to fix it, but to understand it. This isn't easy. It takes practice, it takes courage, but it's also incredibly freeing. Imagine carrying around a crying child all day, pretending you can't hear them. Eventually, you'd feel exhausted and irritated. But if you stopped, sat down, and asked what they needed, maybe they'd quiet. Maybe they'd fall asleep in your arms. Our inner life is like that. The parts of us we avoid are not trying to hurt us, they're trying to be seen, to be understood. Emotions as messengers. What if your anxiety was trying to tell you something? Not just that something is wrong, but that something inside you needs attention. Maybe you're stretched too thin. Maybe you're ignoring your values. Maybe you're living in a way that doesn't align with your heart. What if your sadness wasn't weakness, but a sign of what you care about most? What if your confusion was the space between stories, the moment before clarity dawns? So often, we label our emotions as problems. But in Buddhist psychology, emotions are seen as natural phenomena. They arise, they pass, and in their arising, they carry information. The goal isn't to banish them. The goal is to understand them, the practice of looking closely. Looking closely doesn't require a retreat or a formal practice. It begins with a willingness to pause, to turn toward the experience instead of away. Next time you feel that familiar tightness in your chest, or the fog in your head, or the lump in your throat, try this. Stop. Breathe. Ask, what's here right now? Name it if you can. This is fear. This is exhaustion. This is longing. Stay with it, even for a few seconds, not to change it, just to know it. Sometimes just naming what we feel is enough to shift the experience.